Good morning, everybody. Welcome. I would like to welcome to this event, the bridging. It's part of the Bridging the West Coasts, the European Union in Berkeley, Digital Agendas, the European Union and the USA at a glance. I would like to thank our special guests for being present, our Consul General of Portugal in San Francisco as well, for having for being with us today as well, and having supported this with this event. I would like to thank the moderator Annie Hellman and all the guests there, the guest speakers that are with us today, and in particular also the co-sponsor institutions such as the Jean Monnet European Union Center of Excellence, the Artificial Intelligence Security Initiative, the Center for Long-Term Cybersecurity, the Consulate General of Portugal as well, and for last, the FLAD, the Luso-American Development Foundation. Thank you all for being present. We are broadcasting this event on YouTube, so if you don't want to be filmed, please turn off your cameras and your microphones. We'll have some 10 minutes for questions and answers at the end of the event. But for now, I would like to invite the Consul General Pedro Pinto to say some words.
Thank you very much, Duarte, and thank you very much to the University of Berkeley. For some reason, the video is not working, but I'll keep talking anyway. Can you hear me, Duarte?
Yes, yes.
So I don't know why the video is not working, but anyways, because I cannot do it. Anyways, thank you very much to the University of Berkeley for organizing this session. And thank you in particular to Annie Hellman for moderating it, and Professor Jessica Newman, Professor Philip Train, and my friends and colleagues in the Portuguese permanent representation to the European Union, Ricardo Castanheira and Gonçalo Grave. The purpose of this series was to put main EU topics on Berkeley's agenda and help bridging Europe and California. And obviously, digital issues is a key topic in this endeavor. All these issues within the digital agenda played a very important role in the recent Portuguese presidency of the European Union. And these two colleagues, Ricardo and Gonçalo, they chaired the working groups that dealt with these issues. Ricardo very successfully in the work on the European digital agenda, and Gonçalo, big effort in coordinating the European Union position on digital taxation. Therefore, we feel this is going to be a very interesting exchange, and we thank you all for participating. Thank you.
And now, Annie, I would like to pass the word to you. Thank you so much for being the moderator again at this event.
Oh, thank you, Duarte. The pleasure is all mine. I'm honored to be here. And welcome all on my behalf also for this important event. The digital agendas of EU and the US, both are quite important and fast developing. So I think we will be all very curious to hear a bit on both sides and how they compare. I think Duarte already said that as the connection may always be a bit unstable, those who are not speaking, please turn off your cameras, and all who are not speaking, I mean, the panelists, of course, we stay on, and all do take care to mute your microphones. If we have time in the end, then we will be happy to take questions. And for the questions, we'll have them in the chat. So while the people are speaking, you can already introduce your questions to the chat, but I suggest we take them only when all the panelists have spoken. So today, our 4 panelists are Ricardo Castañero, Jessica Newman, Gonzalo Grad, and Philippe Trein, and they will be speaking in that order. So without further ado, let's get started. So the first speaker is Ricardo Castañero. He's the Digital and Telecom Council Coordinator at the Portuguese Permanent Representation to the EU. And during the Portuguese presidency, as the Council General already said, Ricardo has been in charge of the negotiations on digital and telecom files, such as those related to digital services and artificial intelligence. So he will present the state of play of the European digital agenda and the role of Trade and Technology Council as an EU-US platform for discussing common challenges related to technologies. Very interesting start for this panel. So Ricardo, over to you. Sorry about the mix-up of Portuguese names.
No problem at all. Well, Annie, thank you. Thank you very much. Good morning or good night, depending on where you are. First of all, thank you very much to my dear friend, Pedro Pinto, Honorable Consul General of Portugal in San Francisco, that just arrived and suddenly things started to happen, for this timely and very kind invitation. And also it's a great pleasure to share the stage with all the other panelists. The digital transition is, with no doubt, with one of the top priorities of the EU's agenda, being recognized as a strong driver of sustainable economic recovery, and an unique opportunity also to strengthen the digital and the single market. The pandemic has unprecedentedly accelerated the digital transition. We all recognize that. And while this acceleration has allowed a number of companies to remain in business, it has also accentuated the EU's dependencies and weaknesses in this domain, demonstrating the need for investment and more development on this area. And Europe aims to strengthen its digital sovereignty in order to respond to future challenges, while ensuring the security, of course, of its citizens and the protection, especially of our democratic values. And we want really to be, and this is a clear ambition, to become a role model in the digital economy, globally speaking. But to achieve this, Europe has to develop digital standards and support developing economies in going digital. And I would like to start to say that the European approach on digital transition is based mainly on 3 pillars. The first pillar is ensuring that a technology that works for the people, by investing in digital skills for all Europeans, protecting people from cyber threats, ensuring, for example, that AI is developed in ways that respect people's rights, that can earn their trust. This is the kind of very important messages that are strongly linked with this kind of anthropocentric vision that we do have when we talk about digital in Europe. Then a second pillar is guaranteeing a fair and competitive digital economy by enabling innovative and fast-growing startups and unicorns to expand and access finance. Also strengthening the responsibility of online platforms, and I will talk about this in detail, as well as clarifying the rules for all the online services, and really making sure that the EU rules are fit for the digital economy, that there is a fair competition of all companies in Europe, not just European ones, but also those that are coming from other blocks. And of course, this is a very important aspect as well. And the third is striving for an open, democratic and sustainable society, because we need to use technology to help Europe, for example, becoming, and after Glasgow, climate neutral by 2050. We need to reduce the digital sector's carbon emissions. We need to give citizens more control over their data. We need to develop, and during the COVID, it is evident to everyone, We need to build an European health data space to foster, for example, targeted research, diagnosis or treatment. And we also need, this is very important, fight disinformation online and also fostering reliable media content. That's why that during the last 12 months, very, very important initiatives came up. And for example, the Commission put on the table during our presidency, a very important communication on the digital compass, the European way for the digital decades. And the objectives of this strategy were or are still guided by 4 cardinal points, I would say. The development of a digital and human skills, the investment in secure and sustainable digital infrastructures, the digital transformation of companies, and also the digitalization of the public services. Those are, I would say, the 4 cardinal points. Then let's zoom in on some of the legislative initiatives that we are discussing. This is a very important week. In 2 days, we at the Council, we will try to get a general approach on the Digital Services Act. The Digital Services Act is part of the Digital Services Package. And this is the first horizontal and comprehensive legislation to regulate modern day digital platforms. It has been a key priority for Europe during the last months. And the urgency has been shown during COVID times with the increase of illegal content, illegal products, as well as disinformation campaigns, but also the events that took place in Washington, DC, in the capital, not just in Europe. And that's why the DMA, the Digital Markets Act, and the DSA, the Digital Services Act, especially the DSA, is an opportunity to define a common European approach for the governance of the online space, in line again with our values, as well as an opportunity to strengthen the EU soft power and global influence by putting forward for the first ever regulation on online platforms, which we really believe that can, and we hope, of course, that can work as an international regulatory standard, such as the GDPR, more or less, work. We recognize the need to modernize the rules that apply to e-commerce, but we also understand that there is the need of a clear framework with clear responsibilities for platforms. This is including clear to the industry. That's why, for example, we have received strong support from almost all the member states during the discussion. That's why we were able to speed up the discussion, and probably last December when it has been proposed, if someone would tell us that in 11 months we would probably get to the end, nobody would believe on it. The fact is that we were able to do it. Strong, a lot of work, but we are here, and I think that we are really close to set up the first comprehensive regulation of digital services. And this is very important, especially to include an updating of the liability regime of the duty of care provisions, as well as a better enforcement governance to ensure that the rules on the DSA and the DMA are properly respected. Then we have the data strategy, and data is raw material for everything when we talk about digital. And the data economy is really one of the key areas in the current digital strategy in the EU. Our aim is to build an European single data market. And this is key for the future, because data flows between countries and sectors must be available for use, for reuse, again, respecting the European values. We love to say that because we do have European values. And this is very important to note. And it's also crucial that individuals and companies have as well control over the data that they can generate. They have confidence in data sharing and data sharing mechanisms, and that they are comfortable with the innovative way of in which their data is used, for example, with AI. But it's also important the creation of standards that ensure interoperability, for example, to ease the movement of those data. And this is what we have been discussed, or what we discussed in the Council, and now we are discussing already with the Parliament on the Data Governance Act. And the Data Governance Act, the DGA, represents exactly the first step in this vital enterprise for the future of European data and the European data economy. We recently got and reached a general approach. And now, as I've mentioned, we are discussing with in the trilogues with the Parliament, and this is the last phase of the ordinary legislative procedure. Then there is a very important program and project that came out from some member states, from the industry, and then supported and recognized as a priority as well by the Commission. And I'm talking about the Cloud and Gaia X program. Which has an ambition behind which is create an inclusive framework and also a level playing field that promotes interoperability, data sharing, simplifying regulatory frameworks when we talk about data, but as well as international connectivity. And international connectivity is a key priority. It has been one of our main achievements during the Portuguese presidency. Just to remind you that we've launched the first submarine cable between Europe and South America during the Portuguese presidency, between Portugal, south of Lisbon, and the northeast of Brazil. And this is something that it's very, very, very important, especially when the UK left EU. And as you know, UK is still a very important hub when we talk about international connectivity. Then AI. We are still discussing AI, very complex file, technical and politically speaking, very difficult, but this is the very first regulatory action at EU level to first avoid the fragmentation of the single market, because some member states started already to do things on AI. And we really need a future-proof and flexible regulation. We must avoid as much as possible unnecessary regulatory burdens, which could hamper investment in innovation, especially for our SMEs and our startups, while, of course, promoting a high quality and trustworthy AI. And one very important note, what distinguishes the European digital model as I've mentioned to you, the ethical dimension that we want to be reflected in the digital world. And AI is an opportunity to make it happen. That's why, first, we think that there is a risk-based approach, which is very, very important. The proposed rules address risks specifically created by AI applications, but it's a list of high-risk applications with different kind of requests, and also with some do's and don'ts. It's very important that there is a human intervention and human control on by design, I would say, when we talk about AI. And this part of our discussion, legal, and I would say this collective brainstorming that we are now having. Then a very important, small piece, but very important and impactful one, the European digital identity. It means that member states need to offer to citizens and the businesses digital wallets that will be able to link, for example, the digital national identities cards with the driving license, bank account, and these wallets may be provided by also public authorities, private entities, and then can be recognized by all the member states, enabling Europeans to access services online without having to use private identification methods or unnecessary sharing of personal data. This is very, very important, and we have seen the relevance of this when we have developed, for example, the COVID tracing apps that were very difficult for us to make it working all together, because, of course, there is a big challenging on interoperability, and there was not, and still we don't have European digital identity. Then we have the e-privacy. The e-privacy regulation has stayed for 8 presidencies, 4 years in the Council, and we, the Portuguese presidency, we were able to close the discussion. is absolutely critical. It concerns for the respect for private life, the protection of personal data in electronic communications, and it's very, very important. And we are negotiating it with the Parliament. Then two last words. One on the CHIPS Act. We still don't know what it will be, but it has been already announced by the European Commission. The President, Ursula von der Leyen, mentioned it during her State of the Union speech some weeks ago. And the legislation in this area is absolutely essential to, given the dependence of we all, not just Europeans, all, but especially we in Europe, of such kind of technologies. This kind of act is therefore to create an European ecosystem of next generation chips that also covers the production, but at the same time that can guarantee Europe's security of supply chain and develop also some new markets for pioneering European technology. And the last word is about transatlantic cooperation. That's what we are doing right now in this kind of close relationship with our American friends. And the most important message to our dear American friends is very simple from this side of the Atlantic, is that the transatlantic relationship is a clear priority for the European Union, no doubt about that. And we have common interests, shared values, and also immense challenges ahead of us. That's why we believe that we need to work together, especially when we talk about green digital transitions, which are the drivers of sustainable and fair economic and social recovery. And that's why it was so important, so well received, the announcement of the Trade and Technology Council. Because it's really a very important piece to enhance this common agenda. And among the topics that have been and will be addressed by and discussed by this Tech Council are the ones that I've mentioned already: AI, semiconductors, the role of the platforms regarding harmful content, disinformation, and others. It means that the European agenda is there. For sure, the American digital agenda is also there. And we believe that this Tech Council is really the right way to set up, I would say, strongest common ground to develop and implement solutions on AI that respect the human rights, I've mentioned. Also, the way to reduce the dependence on third parties with regard to semiconductors, because we know that neither the United States and Europe have the control of the supply chain, and we need to reduce vulnerabilities in both sides of the Atlantic. And last but not the least, we need a common strategy when we talk about the protection of society and protection of our democracies regarding manipulation and misinformation. And this is a critical aspect. We have a very ambitious agenda ahead of us, and the Tech Council is, again, a very important piece to strengthen the cooperation between both sides of the Atlantic. And I hope that could help you to understand a bit about and to give you the big picture about where we are when we talk about the European digital agenda. Thank you, Annie. Thank you all.
Many thanks, Ricardo. That was a very comprehensive description of what Europe is doing, and it also describes how much is going on. And I think it was very, very appropriate that you started with pandemic, because as challenging as it has been, the pandemic has really brought to the front the challenges and the opportunities of the digital. So that was great. And now I'm going to welcome Jessica Newman as our second speaker. So let me tell you a bit about Jessica. So she is a research fellow at the UC Berkeley Center for Long-Term Cybersecurity, where she leads the AI Security Initiative, a hub for interdisciplinary research on the global security implications of AI. And she's also a member of the OECD network of experts on AI, the AS Task Force on Artificial Intelligence and National Security, and the Partnership on AI Expert Group on Fair, Transparent, and Accountable AI. Very impressive, Jessica. Her research focuses on the governance, policy, and politics of artificial intelligence, with particular attention on comparative analysis of national AI strategies and policies. So today she'll be focusing her remarks on AI strategies in the US with an eye towards the transatlantic and international cooperation. Very, very interesting. We are looking forward to hearing from you. Over to you, Jessica.
Thank you so much, Annie, for the introduction, and to the organizers for arranging this conversation. It's really an honor to be here. So as Annie said, I'm going to focus my remarks on the US context and touch on some avenues for transatlantic cooperation. In particular, I will give an overview of the US strategic and governance landscape for AI to help characterize one subset of the broader digital ecosystem. Typically, when people think about a digital agenda in the US, it's about the continued promotion of innovation and a comparatively lax regulatory structure. The US is sometimes referred to as the digital Wild West, especially when compared to the EU. Despite persistent efforts, we do not yet have a federal data protection and privacy law along the lines of GDPR. The story of digital technologies in the United States is often one of extremes. On the one hand, US digital technology companies have seen staggering successes. Apple, Google, Amazon, Microsoft, Facebook each have a market cap that is bigger than more than 90% of countries' GDPs. And yet their services and platforms have also been responsible for harms at unprecedented scales, from spreading misinformation about the pandemic and elections to enabling divisive content that causes real-world violence. The recent release of the Facebook papers make it clear that whatever accountability mechanisms there are now, they are not sufficient. The tools and services that these companies provide reach millions of people all over the world, and people are growing wary of the costs associated with this Wild West approach. The increasing use of AI technologies across all of these platforms is part of the story, from recommender systems that provide personalized targeting of items to buy and information to see, to the virtual assistants we speak to in our homes, like Alexa or Siri. AI technologies are a key component of the continued successes of these companies. According to a McKinsey report in 2018, Amazon's recommendation engine already accounted for up to 35% of its revenue. Meanwhile, these companies are perfectly aware of the potential harms of AI due to bias, errors, misuse, and unintended consequences. Amazon had to scrap a hiring tool after it was found to discriminate against women. Google decided not to renew a contract with the Defense Department after employees protested contributing to the weaponization of AI. Moreover, the technologies developed by these and other companies can be repurposed for different ends. We are seeing AI technologies contributing to censorship and surveillance within authoritarian regimes. Despite increasing awareness of these risks, the United States does not yet have a federal AI law, or even federal laws to protect against domain-specific AI risks, such as the abuse of facial recognition technology by law enforcement, autonomous weapons, or the lack of common safety standards for self-driving cars. That being said, more than 24 US states have enacted legislation related to autonomous vehicles. Multiple states and cities have also enacted legislation limiting the use of facial recognition technology. And of course, California has the California Consumer Privacy Act and the California Privacy Rights Act, which provide some data protections. In January 2020, the White House also released guidance for forthcoming AI regulation. It seems likely that the regulatory landscape for AI in the US is likely to evolve in the coming years. In the meantime, there are numerous existing laws that apply to AI. For example, earlier this year, the US Federal Trade Commission issued a statement of intent explaining that AI products are not outside the scope of its consumer protection laws, and that companies will need to ensure their AI systems are transparent, explainable, fair, and empirically sound. Still, the FTC's remit is limited. Meanwhile, the EU is working toward finalizing its regulatory framework for AI, which promises to be more all-encompassing. Most of the attention in the US at the federal level thus far has not focused on regulation, but on establishing strategies and guidance. So that's where I'll focus the rest of my remarks. The current US national AI strategy is directed by the National AI Initiative. This was established through the National AI Initiative Act of 2020 and became law in January of this year. This is not to be confused with the American AI Initiative, which was previously launched in an executive order by the Trump White House. But in fact, there is a lot of overlap between the two initiatives. Both emphasize innovation, advancing trustworthy AI, education and training, infrastructure, applications, and international cooperation. There are, of course, important differences between the administration's approaches. The Trump administration often talked about reducing regulatory burdens for AI innovation, and the Biden administration has had more of a focus on algorithmic bias and equity considerations. President Biden established an equitable data working group on his first day in office. But in general, there has been relatively bipartisan support for the country's AI strategy, with many efforts now having continued through 2 or 3 administrations. For example, the original National AI R&D Strategic Plan was released under the Obama administration in 2016. This was not thrown out by the Trump administration, but rather updated in 2019 and continues to stand today. The AI R&D plan is a high-level framework that establishes priorities for federally funded AI. Importantly, this was always scoped to look at the long-term transformational impacts of AI on society and the world. The first strategy was to make long-term investments in AI research. Other strategies focus on human AI collaboration, addressing ethical, legal, and societal implications, ensuring safety and security, developing shared public data sets and environments for AI training and testing, developing standards and benchmarks, and supporting workforce needs. The 2019 update of the R&D plan reaffirmed all 7 of these strategies and only added 1 additional strategy: to expand public-private partnerships to accelerate advances in AI. This strategy calls for collaboration with academia, industry, and international partners. Beyond this relatively consistent vision for AI R&D, I'll highlight 2 other elements that have played central roles in the US AI strategy. The first is improving AI standards, metrics, and risk management approaches. This is specifically called out in the National AI Initiative, but work on it has been underway for about 3 years now. This work is being led by the National Institute of Standards and Technology, or NIST. They're organizing multiple efforts on the development of AI standards. They're also defining quantifiable measures to characterize AI technologies, including measuring accuracy, complexity, explainability, privacy, safety, and others. And they are developing an AI risk management framework intended to improve the ability to incorporate trustworthiness into the design, development, use, and evaluation of AI systems. This work is likely to be quite impactful, shaping industry practices and informing policy both in the US and abroad. The second element that's played a primary role in the US AI strategy for several years is collaboration with international allies. In practice, this has resulted in significant US engagement in various international fora, most notably through the OECD. For example, in May 2019, the US adopted the OECD recommendation on AI, which formalized the first set of global AI principles. The US has ongoing leadership throughout the OECD AI Policy Observatory, which has been facilitating multidisciplinary dialogue and developing frameworks to support the implementation of the principles. All of the elements of the US AI strategy that I mentioned, the National AI Initiative, the AI R&D plan, the work on standards, metrics, and risk management at NIST, and the work on international collaboration at the OECD, these are all very much ongoing and relatively early efforts. The Biden administration has an opportunity to advance all of the goals of the strategy significantly. But this might be especially true when it comes to advancing international and transatlantic cooperation, which did suffer over the last few years under the previous administration. The EU-US Trade and Technology Council is an important way to start the transatlantic dialogue and to set further action in motion. The TTC was already covered in detail by Ricardo, but I'll just reiterate that it is likely to be an important forum for advancing AI collaboration specifically. At the first TTC meeting, the US and EU reaffirmed their commitment to working together to ensure that AI is used in ways consistent with shared democratic values and human rights. They've stated that they plan to develop cooperation mechanisms to share information and coordinate on international standards activities for AI. They also talked about countering dangerous uses of technology that threaten security and human rights, including surveillance, disinformation, and manipulation. For example, they mentioned developing convergent control approaches on sensitive dual-use technologies. This is important because we have a new window of opportunity to support transatlantic cooperation on AI. While the EU is often perceived as the world's technology watchdog, and in sharp contrast to the vision of the US as the digital Wild West, the reality is more nuanced than that. Many AI risks, such as the amplification of polarization and extremism, cut across borders. And while I focus this talk on the US, there are meaningful shared goals with the EU. Both acknowledge that AI technologies can violate human safety and fundamental rights, and that there is an urgent need to prevent such dangerous and harmful ends. The EU and the US have not always agreed on the regulation of digital technologies, but closer cooperation is now needed to prevent the proliferation of harmful AI uses and to help shape global AI norms that support democratic values and human rights. Thank you.
Thank you, Jessica. Now, that was a great continuation from Ricardo. As Ricardo already mentioned a few words about the AI in Europe, and we have a comprehensive description of what is happening in the US. And on both, it's great to see how the human-centric aspect and the ethical concerns are very much a priority. So from these areas, we will now jump to a different area. Gonzalo Grad, he has been the fiscal attaché at the permanent representation of Portugal to the European Union since 2020. And he's following, among others, the direct taxation and digital taxation files. So we will hear from Gonzalo a bit about the tax challenges of the digital economy and the state of play of the OECD tax deal, and also a bit about the US and EU in that. So over to you, Gonzalo.
Thank you very much, Annie, for your introduction and for moderating what has been an insightful discussion. Let me start by thanking the Consul General of Portugal, Pedro Pinto, for the kind invitation, and the University of Berkeley to be part of this conference. I'm delighted to be part of such a top-notch panel. And in a more personal note, it's great to see Pedro again, and I'm happy to see that he's bridging the west coast of Europe and the US. As you said, Annie, I will change a little bit the landscape since I'm going to talk about taxation, and I promise I will try not to bother you to death with this subject. Trying not to be very time-consuming, I would like to address and to shed some light on the tax challenges arising from digitalization. As you know, the digitalization of the economy has an impact in a wide array of fields, being taxation one of them. Globalization and the development of information, communication technologies have generated new organizational and management models. And this phenomenon of transformation is at the outset of the digital economy. So what is our challenge? In one hand, digitalization is a global phenomenon with an impact in daily lives of businesses, companies, and billions of people. And on the other hand, there is a general consensus that tax policy was, especially international tax policy, was designed having in mind another type of economic structure. in simple terms, how to link up the two in a fair and effective manner. Perhaps let me start by giving some context. Dematerialization is a key feature of the digital economy. Digitalization, the intangible nature of the economic and commercial process, and the decreasing need for physical presence reflects this dematerialization. This feature has a profound impact and effect on direct taxation, especially business taxation, namely on the operation of traditional elements upon which taxation relied, strongly dependent on existence of physical elements. Unlike businesses in traditional economy, companies and businesses that are part of the digital economy can generate significant revenues in foreign countries without putting up big offices or having many employees there, or create subsidiaries of any kind. This doesn't mean that digital economy creates what we call the base erosion and profit shifting issues, the so-called BEPS, because it doesn't. However, it exacerbates and amplifies the existing ones. This is because digital goods are highly mobile or intangible. The physical presence of a company in the market country is often not needed in the digital sector. For example, we can think about Facebook. They create value without having a subsidiary in each country, rendering it substantially different from traditional brick and mortar businesses. New digital models like subscription, access or advertising models, and new technologies are not confined by national boundaries and can easily escape their tax liabilities by channeling, for example, their royalty payments towards a tax haven. On the other hand, the taxation of e-commerce is problematic due to anonymity on one side, difficulty to determine the amount of tax on the other, by nature, the lack of paper trail, then the existence of tax havens, and it's easy to, without paper trail, to run the business through tax havens, or companies incurring liability in multiple countries. This context shows us the major reasons why tax authorities around the world, especially in Europe and in the United States, are worried about the digital economy, or at least this is a major concern. And going back to my initial question, how to link up the two aspects, an outdated taxation model with an evolving economic structure. This ongoing and unstoppable reality is making the established international tax framework almost obsolete, because two key features, the significant economic presence and the significant physical presence, are no longer interlinked. The digital economy falls outside the compass of the latter, creating a void. So one of the most important questions that OECD, the US, and the European countries had to answer was how best to tax digital economy. And the question was whether to tweak the existing rules, like a patch, or to create a new set of rules, and by doing so, upgrade the international tax rules. In 2013, OECD ramped up efforts to address these challenges in response to growing public and political concerns about tax avoidance by large multinationals. And the current rules still allow large multinationals to earn significant income in a jurisdiction without paying corporate income tax there. So there was really a call for an upgrade from almost every country or jurisdiction, but with special focus on European countries and in the US side. So after years of intensive work and negotiations to bring the international tax rules into the 21st century, and after, I have to say, an unsuccessful proposal for a digital tax from the European Commission in 2018, and other digital service taxes from some European Union member states, members of the OECD Inclusive Framework on BEPS group agreed last October to the statement on the two-pillar solution to address the tax challenges arising from digitalization of the economy. Pillar 1, for example, aims to ensure a fairer distribution of profit and taxing rights among countries, giving market jurisdiction new taxing rights concerning the largest multinational companies. As a consequence, Pillar 1 will require all parties to remove all digital service tax and other relevant similar measures with respect to all companies, and to commit not to introduce such measures in future. And this is the reason why the US, Austria, France, Italy, Spain, and even UK made a joint statement regarding a compromise on a transitional approach to existing unilateral measures during the interim period before Pillar 1 is in effect, which is envisaged to 2023. And as a part of this compromise, for example, the US agrees to terminate proposed trade actions and commit not to impose further actions against these European member states, Austria, France, Spain, Italy, and UK. So in fact, trying to decrease a little bit the trade tensions between the US and these countries. On the other hand, Pillar 2 will put the floor on tax competition, on corporate income tax, through the introduction of a global corporate tax rate of 15% that countries can use to protect their tax bases, so the so-called minimum tax rate. And the United States had a major role on this because in a period where this OECD agreement was in standby, especially because the previous US administration pulled out from the negotiations. But in a critical moment, the United States had a major step on this because the United States, which proposed the 15% minimum corporate tax rate, has long looked for ways to minimize incentives for companies to shift profits abroad to lower their tax bills. And as the Biden administration prepares to try to raise corporate rates in the US, of course, getting a global minimum tax in place was critical, or is critical, to prevent companies from simply moving their headquarters overseas. So being one of the reasons why the US pushed forward to an agreement in a very critical moment of this process. However, we have to wait and see if Congress will ratify or will sign this OECD agreement, and this is a big question mark now. In terms of implementation, from the European Union side, the European Commission is planning to propose 2 directives to implement the OECD Multilateral Global Tax Reform Agreement in 2022. Each directive would be dedicated to a pillar of the OECD agreement. Pillar 1 would be transposed through a directive giving market jurisdictions a right to tax part of the profits of certain non-resident businesses by providing for a reallocation of a portion of these global profits, and this is something new in the international tax framework. And this is envisaged for the third quarter of 2022. So let's see if we can meet this date. A second directive would implement the OECD model of Pillar 2 on a minimum effective taxation, and it might also introduce an obligation for multinational enterprises to publish their effective tax rate, and this one is envisaged for the first quarter of 2002. By doing this, the European Commission means to ensure an harmonized and comprehensive implementation of the two pillars, even if in the case of the Pillar 1, to which OECD will provide a multilateral convention, this won't be needed. On the other hand, for example, Pillar 2 framework as it stands, which is applicable to cross-border situations, it may result in a less favorable treatment than in purely domestic situations, violating the freedom of establishment and the free movement of capital. So this EU directive would solve this by extending the agreement to domestic subsidiaries. While we are waiting for OECD to flesh out this political agreement with more technical rules, the so-called model rules, also important for, of course, for Commission to close their work on two directives, some say that we might end up with a patch instead of an upgrade. And against the background of the latest developments, that might be a reasonable assessment. In fact, this agreement has a less broad scope than some predicted and will not update all the outdated concepts enacting the international tax tool box. However, I think by all accounts, this can be considered a major step forward. It's an attempt to solve, or at least to respond to a taxation problem we were and we are still facing. It is above all a success of multilateralism, because this have involved 140 countries and jurisdictions. So is in I think by all accounts it's an enormous success. Moreover, this will force, and I think there is no doubt about that, some changes. And last and foremost, it would generate additional tax revenue, especially in market jurisdictions where until now they did not have the necessary tools to do so.
Gonzalo,
I will stop here. Yes, Annie.
Okay. No, I was I was very aware of the time, so
yeah,
I welcomed your last sentence.
So I will stop here and back over to you, Annie.
Thank you so much. Yeah, apologies. That was very interesting, but I'm very aware of the time. And Philip, we want to hear from Philip still. So I'll quickly just present Philip and give over to him. And Philip, you can go a bit over time, obviously. So Philip is an assistant professor in the public administration and policy at the University of Lausanne and a senior fellow at the UC Berkeley. His research interests cover the coordination and integration of public policy, the politicization of e-government, the politics of preventative health policies, and the problem-solving capacity of multi-level systems and crisis politics. In 2019, he received the Ambizione grant from Swiss National Science Foundation. So Philip, over to you, and I understand that you can go a bit over time. Apologies for that.
Thank you very much for the invitation to this event, and it is, of course, my great pleasure to talk a bit about the some aspects of the EU digital agenda. I will share some slides with you with some materials that are part of the presentation. So I hope you can see that, and I will talk a bit about the politicization and the regulation of artificial intelligence. So if you look at the EU-US Trade and Technology Council, TTC, we see that it intends to cooperate on the governance of AI, for example, amongst other issues. And as it was already said, aims at implementing a human-centered application, protection of civil rights and democracy. If we look at the scientific literature or the scholarly literature on these kinds of councils, the first thing we see is that the policy diffusion literature expects us indeed to find some learning between the US and the EU and regarding regulatory practices. And that is certainly what politicians use as a selling argument for transatlantic cooperation. But this type of council also is likely to stimulate competition between the two models that have already been outlined by Jessica in her previous talk. A second point, and this is a repetition of what has been said before, we commonly would say that the EU has a much stricter regime at the regulatory level of digital contents and infrastructure compared to the US, due to the regulations mentioned already in the talk by Ricardo, I think it was. So if we now look at the introduction of AI in the public sector and ask the question, how is it politicized? How does it receive political attention by decision makers? We can distinguish on the one hand politicization as the public attention that an issue receives. For example, debate by various actors, parties, and interest groups, which discuss the different aspects of the policy problem in a very democratic way. Or we can talk about a depoliticized introduction and implementation of AI that happens behind closed doors, meaning that it is done by bureaucrats or by experts, mainly without involvement of political parties and the wider public. And the case of AI is in fact the case where we see politicization that happens ex post. So we see that there is an implementation of algorithms, so of as we would say, automated decision-making programs, or in different parts of public policy implementation. For example, in the US, there is an algorithm that predicts recidivism. In the Netherlands, there's an algorithm that was set to detect welfare fraud, and both were applied without much of a politicization of a public debate about it. And public attention only increased after some scandals appeared. For example, in the case of the US algorithm, this was that it appears to be racially biased, and in the US, it seems to be in the Netherlands, the algorithm to detect welfare fraud was in fact distinguishing quite unjustly and unethically between claimants. Now, if we look at different AI policy initiatives, and we need to compare not only the EU and the US, but also different nation states, because in the European context, it clearly is the member states who implement AI policy as well, and who are going to make policies related to AI in the framework of the European regulation. And if we look at this picture here, we do actually see that in the United States, a lot of policy activity has been going on at the national level. And the graph that you see here shows OECD data based on the AI Policy Observatory by the OECD. And we do see, in fact, that in the US, there is a lot of policy activity, whereas some European nation states have done much less. And I realize now that I should have included Portugal in this graph, which I unfortunately did not do, but should be done in the future. So I will now turn to some insights from research that we did on the politicization of AI, and we looked at the debate of artificial intelligence in the German parliament from 2017 to 2019. And these were the year before and after the implementation of the national AI strategy. And the first thing that we find is that there was very little conflict about the implementation of AI. And the graph, the network that you see here, links shows how different political parties, which are the round dots, these are the main parties in the German national parliament, to which policy issues they link AI. And what we see is that most parties link AI to technology policy, domestic commerce, somehow to education, but much less to labor rights, and especially limited, especially not very much to environment. Only the Green Party links artificial intelligence to environmental and climate-related issues. This indicates that, and another point that comes out is that the point of civil rights, which would be ethical AI, is only been raised by the most extreme parties in parliament. So when it comes to the standards the EU hopes to achieve in its framework regulation, at the national level, political parties don't really talk about all aspects, but focus on technology and domestic commerce. And then if we look at the government consultation, which the German government did on its national AI strategy, we see in this graph that there are three types of actors that really gave the most statements about this consultation. And these are scientific actors, these are firms, and these are business interest groups. And they talk again about technology policy and about domestic commerce, especially. Whereas more civil rights issues and social policies are much less mentioned in the context of AI. So we do see that the implementation preferences of AI at the national level is very much focused about economic policy and innovation policy in the German case, which arguably is an important one important member of the European Union. So now, what are the implications of this for the work in the TTC? The first one, and that is the first point I raised, that there might not only be learning about regulatory practices, but also competition regarding the governance of AI to protect continental industries. This certainly is an issue that plays an important role. Secondly, we have strict framework regulations at the EU level, but at the national level in Europe, policies are in their infancy, and as we all know, the implementation of EU regulation remains in the hands of national governments. This is illustrated, this misfit between the EU regulation and national policy debate is illustrated by the debate in Germany, which focuses on general issues of AI and on policies that are related to the investment in technologies. There is no debate about how to regulate AI. So in order to achieve the goals that are formulated in the TTC agreements and how to implement this at the national level. So it remains a European project, which is what happens often, but it is also likely to create difficulties in policy implementation at the national level. And finally, we need to keep in mind that regulating AI is likely to appear ex post. So that is, for example, after a scandal around its application, which might have negative consequences for the reputation of the technology and for public support for the application of the technology. And this might undermine some of the goals of the European project about EU digital regulation, which really puts into its center the ethical aspect. So these are the points that I wanted to raise about the topic, and I'm looking forward to your comments, questions, and responses.
Thank you, Philip. A very interesting point. I mean, this regulation coming a bit behind always is very much demonstrated in AI. I agree very much with that. So we've heard now a lot what is happening in the Europe and in the US. We are over time, but I think if that's okay for you, Duarte, maybe we can have a few questions from the chat.
A couple of questions. Yeah, there's a couple of questions perhaps. I think one is for Gonzalo and the other one is for I think everybody.
Yeah, I think both relate to tax. So the first one is our current EU rules on the taxation of virtual currency regulated by the EU or by each country. And the second one is EU and the US, are they somehow coordinating how to deal with China and India on digital tax and data protection? Very simple questions. Maybe you can have quick answers for both of these on one go, Gonzalo.
Yes, thank you, Annie, and thank you, Beatriz Fonseca and Yolinda Adão for these questions. I will start with the last one. Well, in fact, China, it's a member of OECD BEPS, so they are aware of these last developments. In terms of specific coordination with them, especially in terms of China and India, sorry, in terms of the digital tax, I'm not aware of any kind of specific coordination. However, the directives from Commission, especially on Pillar 2, could shape the relation with some third countries. For example, because of the 15% minimum tax rate, could be some countries could, or the countries where the headquarters are located, could apply a top-up tax to revenues derived from from subsidiaries, for example, that are located and in low tax jurisdictions, and because of that, subject to a tax rate below the minimum tax rate. And we are discussing, for example, if this top-up tax should be mandatory or optional, and if the jurisdiction of the headquarters should apply it, or should be the lower tax jurisdiction itself, because they are giving a tax benefit, why they do not, or why they won't collect that extra revenue. So these changes that are still being negotiated could shape the relation with third countries, but it's too soon to understand which way the Commission will follow. On the first question, in fact, there is not a common approach on this, on taxation, because on, for example, financing and banking already, we already have some directives to for combating money laundering and financing terrorism, like MiCA or the AMLD, I think, that deals with virtual currency, especially on financial markets. In terms of taxation, we still don't have any common approach. Some member states are putting in place specific legislation, others don't. This doesn't mean the absence of regulation, but I guess, especially because now we are discussing some directives for the exchange of information between tax administrations, and these new discussions has a core we are discussing, or in its core we are discussing, or we will discussing cryptocurrency. So I guess that soon we will have it's my personal opinion, we will have a discussion and a common approach on the taxation of cryptocurrency. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, I have to say, I think this has been very informative and interesting. In addition to the tax, let's say the tax challenges in digital, we have recognized the fragmentation in Europe and the Wild West in the US, and at the same time that both US and Europe are doing a lot towards a more kind of organized, partly more regulated, and in any way more harmonized approach. Both are recognizing the importance of this human-centric approach and the ethics to be taken into account in AI. Probably that is something that needs a lot of attention in the near future. And the very worrisome issues for both the European and the US side is the challenges of the big platform, the enormous influence they have. I think we have made a great coverage of all issues digital, and also on the, let's say, there's a lot of sovereignty need in the EU and probably also in the US. At the same time, these markets, while they are competitive with each other, they are also good in collaboration, which was a great also contribution to see and hear. With these words, I'm very happy to conclude this meeting. I thank you very much, Duarte and the Council General for having invited me here. And I thank the panelists for their very interesting contributions. And I thank all the people who participated. It would have been great to have more time to discuss, because now I feel now it's the time to start discussing. Unfortunately, we cannot do that today, but hopefully there will be future events. So thank you all and have a great day or evening.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Much. Take care. Bye.